All right, and I think we are live and
We're
live for
live.
real this time, JT. This is
Yep.
what happened when I set up one of these. We tried to do the member one a couple Sundays ago, and of course, I just royally screwed it up. Yeah,
You did it.
yeah, and this is a big episode, and you're not in your normal. We don't have your normal background today. You are up in Maine.
Yeah, I'm in Eastport, Maine. I'm far up, about 10 hours from Connecticut, and I'm at the furthest point east in the United States.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow. And we were just on for a couple minutes with our very special guest, and you guys were talking about freshwater fishing. You guys share that passion. And of
Big time.
course, our very special guest today, we're so happy to have him, is Roger from Cooking and Fishing. And here he is in the flesh. Hello,
What's
Roger.
up?
Roger,
What's up, guys?
welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. How's it going?
it's going.
Good.
It's going. Very excited to have you. And we'll dive into it, but maybe a little background as to how we connected. And it's I've said this to you personally, but it's one of the most embarrassing moments of my fishing life, at least in the last year, where my good client Ernesto, and he's also my friend. We decided on a day I didn't have a charter to fish the Rosie in Moriches Bay, fishing about 6 feet of water. And Ernesto is devoted to your channel. I didn't know this. Now he claims he's told me this, but I don't remember. And of course, he's using ultralight setup, and that's what we're going to really focus on today: ultralight setups. He's using ultralight setup, and he is crushing it on the boat. So much so that I borrowed his extra rod, and then I started crushing it. I published the video, and everybody's like, well, you're just doing what Roger from Cooking and Fishing, pardon me, I'm going to say that like 10 times, what Roger from Cooking and Fishing does. And, I checked you out, I subscribed, I ordered some stuff, and we wound up connecting and fishing together, had a great time. We'll talk about that trip too. But yeah, it's such an interesting technique. And I encourage, the followers of our channels, Next Drift, Jigging Jerks, if you haven't checked out Cooking and Fishing, check it out. The things Roger does from the beach is amazing. And it's a completely different style and technique than what you'll see on our channels for the most part, although I think Roger and JT are more aligned than they realize. And yeah, just amazing content. Roger, I mean,
Oh, I appreciate that. So,
Great stuff.
yeah, no, I actually met Ernesto. Ernesto was, when we were doing private lessons, he was our first one. This was, I think, 3 years ago now, and he picked it up quick. And since then, as long as he's able to fish relatively shallow, like that entire bay is probably less than 10, 12 feet deep. So that's how he's been jigging, and it's obviously worked out well for him. But end of the day, it's just jigging, right? Like it's nothing. I think a lot of people got into the high-low rigging, and they sort of never explored what light jigging really is. Like JT knows, like in freshwater, there's really no such thing as rigs. It's just either a jig, even if you're fishing a drop shot, which I guess is sort of like a high-low rig, like
Mhm.
you're only fishing one hook. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
yeah,
It also comes down to it's a
absolutely.
different presentation, it's a different appearance, and especially I don't think people realize that Fluke especially they're super predators. They have big teeth.
for sure.
They're angry. They're aggressive. It's a lot like a bluefish, which is if you're going to compare it to something in freshwater, it'd be like a smallmouth.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
a different type of presentation is you can really trigger a fish into eating a lot of different things that we usually don't use. So
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
and
And yeah,
go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, I always see Fluke as a flat smallmouth that
hmm
always lives on the bottom, so
hmm
you don't need to worry about are they suspending or anything like that. They're always there right on the bottom, and the zone you have to cover is sort of that 1 to 5 feet off the bottom.
yeah.
And anything you can do I mean, the high-low rig, that high rig is sort of at that right depth. So while you're drifting over, you know, I think most beginners, when they're fishing for fluke, they're going to catch most of their fish on the high rig, right? Because they're not fishing the actual jig in the right zone. Like the jig is sort of just like a sinker for them. But
Absolutely.
if you take that jig off, then there's a little bit more of a learning curve.
And Halkias, you and I talked about this a few times. One of the things that I used to always give a charter customer when we went fluke fishing, especially somebody that had no experience, was just a single, a cannonball sinker, and about 8 or 9 inches up from that was just a single hollow teaser with a 5/0 hook and a gulp, and just that one teaser. And I'll tell you what, that thing catches.
You said your friend crushed it with that the other day when you were out. He outfished the bucktail teaser combo, and I got to tell you, Todd Mann did that in Nantucket. He was just using a cannon, a ball sinker, 16 ounces or whatever it was, with a poison tail 14 inches above that, and he was crushing big fish.
Yeah, and to Roger's point, that is essentially just a much larger version of a drop shot that we would use for smallmouth at Lake Ontario or Lake Erie. And that's really what it is, just a drop shot.
A lot of the areas we fish, JT, when Roger was just describing, I had an image because I took his class, and it's a great class, by the way. Go to cookingandfishing.com. Is that the right website, Roger?
Yes,
it's relatively affordable. It's $70. I think it's 70, right? $69.99, Roger,
yeah.
to be honest.
Something like that.
It is so detail oriented. But he has underwater video of the very ultralight jig with the oh God, I'm forgetting the style of gulp now.
It's a 6-inch jerk shad.
The jerk shad, thank you.
Yeah.
And it really looks like the shrimp that you see. And all those draggers kind of in that Gardner's Bay area, right off Gardner's Island. I heard it's shrimp and squid that they're getting. And boy, does that look like a shrimp hopping up and down off the bottom of the water. Yes. So it makes sense that they would hit it. Now, Roger and I actually did fish together, and we experimented in deep water. Roger, I'll let you describe that experience, besides having to deal with me for a number of hours on the water.
It was a perfect day, except the fishing was a little bit slow. We caught a ton of fish, just not really the right size, but it did reinforce for me the notion that once you get over 50 feet, I would say, especially when you're approaching 100 feet of water, it's a completely different way of fishing. Then you're pretty much vertical, because say you're in 100 feet of water and you cast out ahead of the drift, which is how I prefer to fish when I'm on a boat or kayak. You're only casting 100 feet, maybe 150 feet. By the time your jig makes it down to the bottom, it's already 70 feet closer to the boat. So it's not the most efficient thing. I've fished, say, Ambrose Channel in Jersey, out in some of the deeper reefs, and there are days where that kind of fishing will catch you bigger fish, but most of the time it's sort of a wash, and it's a lot more work than what you guys do.
Yeah, so. And what I think was working against us that day, Roger, and we talked about it on the boat, that area is absolutely loaded with small interference fish, small sea robin, small sea bass. And one of the advantages of the more, let's say, the bucktail setup is we put those larger gulp grubs on. And what we probably don't realize, even when we hook a good fluke, is how many interference fish either ignored it because it was too big a presentation, or tried to get it but couldn't get it. Or if you're a savvy enough fisherman, you ignore those not fluke bites. A good fluke fisherman, the thing that will distinguish you in the style that I primarily fish, let's say, is when that's the right hit, and to ignore the wrong hit. Because if you can ignore the wrong hit, your gulp tails won't be stretched out and ripped.
Right.
and you have a chance at least of that bigger fluke getting yours. And we just couldn't get through those interference fish because we were the hits we were getting, it was instantaneous. You would jig once or twice and it was instant hits. But unfortunately, with the thousands of small sea bass around, we just couldn't get through them.
Yeah, and you have to imagine, like, I started off 3/8 ounce, and then once we got to 100 feet, I was casting around a half-ounce jig. It took about 2 minutes for it to get down there. And then, you feel the bite, you set the hook, it's a sea bass, that's another 2 minutes to reel up. It's in terms of efficiency, it's, the 1/4 ounce to half-ounce jig, to me, it's a horizontal type of fishing. Once you're deeper than or approaching the distance that you can cast, it sort of stops making sense most of the time. Now if you have no current and you're not moving, like if you don't have a trolling motor like you guys do on your boats, maybe that's still something you can do. But
yeah, we're gonna show a comment real quick because Roger, your last video resonated with me where you talked about the state of the fluke fishery in 2024. Members of my channel will see I put up a very similar video today that I'd been working on for a few days with a trip where we had a bunch of keepers, but you could tell the fishing was way, way off, and it has been way off in the deeper water this year. And there's T-Sone's comment, one keeper fluke in Montauk, August 15, 24, and then a frown. We empathize, we understand. And Roger, maybe, and again, if you guys haven't checked out Cooking and Fishing, check it out. Roger has a great video, like I said, where he talks about what he's noticed, the trend fishing from the surf and in 2024, and it's not radically different than what we're seeing in the, off the boats in deeper water.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, and then I've talked to people up in Rhode Island as well. They're sort of having an off year. I really, the pattern has been early season to me has been average, meaning if you know where to find the fish, you can have very good days. And then as soon as the weather started feeling like summer, it seemed to just shut off. Tons and tons of shorts. I mean, some of the smallest fluke I've ever seen. The other day I was out there with a jerk bait, and I think my average size fluke has to be something like 10.5 inches, and a few that were barely larger than the jerk bait.
So Roger, you mentioned it in your video, and a lot of the comments were about this too, about the upwell. And the change in bottom temperature that's caused. And that's a good segue to Crabbin' and Fishing's question. Is it temp related or something else? Now, I know you have not perhaps as strong as view as I have on this, because I'm pretty sure it might. Look, we've talked about how fluke fishing's been on the decline for a number of years. So there's more to it than just the temperatures. But this year specifically, the precipitous drop in the amount of good sized fluke we've caught. And I'll go a step further. We had an amazing trip shallow last week, right near the beach. Those fish were lively. They were crazy almost, I would say. The bites were aggressive. We didn't have a long period where they shut down. In the deeper water, they're coming up lethargic. We're dropping them halfway up. They're coming up. They're not flopping around. They're almost half dead when they come up. They're just lethargic. Give us your thoughts on upwell. And for those of you watching who don't know what upwell is, that's this... It's a barometric, I guess, theory that you have tons of south wind, many days, weeks, months in a row. It actually prevents the lower column of the water from warming up. So while the water temp on your fish finder may read 70 degrees, it could be 20 or more degrees lower in the bottom half of the water. And we're talking about deeper water here.
Yeah, so you really feel that cold temperature when you're wading along the beaches, especially we had days where it was like 90 degrees on the beach and the water was barely 50. So yeah, like in years past, in my opinion, if you have a healthy population of fluke, um, you can find a bite. You know, if you're covering the number of miles that we do when we go on the beach, like we'll go 4 to 6, sometimes 8 miles. You can put a catch together. But this year, the people I talk to and myself, it's just some days it just seem completely hopeless. You know, and I mentioned this in my video. Like, obviously, I'm putting content up that those are my best days, right? Like, people aren't seeing me catch 30 shorts and no keepers. Um, those good days are a lot harder to come by this year, and it's all over. So the people I talk to, like, they know what they're doing. They have a track record. Whatever areas they're fishing at, they're noticing the exact same thing. So to me, it could be upwelling. Like, I hope that's really the majority of the problem. I guess we'll find out next year. But if that's going to be the summer patterns here, 3 weeks of south winds every year, then it's sort of a wash either way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and you and I talked about this a little bit on the boat as well. It seems that some of the shallower areas had more productive years than they're used to. So the ocean folks like myself, like JT, while we've struggled this year, I bet if you pull the crew of the Rosie or the Shinnecock Star or some of the boats that hit Shinnecock Bay, Mauritius Bay, I never know how to pronounce that word, or any other body of water that's perhaps shallower. We had a great run this year for the first time in a long time in the Long Island Sound in very shallow water, 20 feet of water,
yeah,
where the bite was ferocious. Perhaps there is something to be said about the upwell, because I would think those shallower bodies of water would be less susceptible to upwell than a deeper body of water.
yeah. I mean, although we have to be specific, there's basically those two bays that you mentioned. Long Island Sound, my understanding is the fluke fishing there is hit or miss almost every year. Like, it's very cyclical.
I think
And
you're right.
right, so it's not really something that, like, they might have a good year this year, next year is anyone's guess. From what I understand, Mauritius, Shinnecock, they're having some of the best fluking that's extended past the early season in like
Mhm.
many, many years. So, it could be a temperature thing. It could be a bait thing, although I'm seeing a ton of bait in Jersey. Like, the bait doesn't seem to be an issue. It's really just a fluke. So yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I think there's a new benchmark survey coming out any day now. Hopefully that will answer some questions about the population. And I know in that video, a lot of people kind of freaked out that I mentioned as a possibility, climate change. Fluke used to be off of North Carolina coast. That's why those guys have all the commercial quota, and those boats get to come all the way up here. And that was the case 30 years ago, and the population is shifting north. I would suspect that as that happens, it's not going to be a perfect, like fish aren't just going to travel the routes that you want them to travel. They can just disappear for maybe a season or two and then pop up where they're going to end up. So I think there's probably a lot of factors at play. Jersey had 2 years of that slot limit, that 1 inch slot limit, which put so much pressure on 1 year class. And that to me is just beyond stupid as well.
Yeah.
So, but that's Jersey for you. Just never, always last place in conservation. It's Jersey.
Yeah, that slot limit, those of you that don't know, they changed it this year, but for 2 years it was two fish between 17 and 18. Am I
Yeah,
getting, and
a
then one
one
fish over?
inch 1 inch slot limit. So you have people that are measuring 15-inch fish because everything looks like it could be 17. And then people lucky enough to get two at that. And then I've heard from a lot of people that some days all they will catch were overs. And then
Yeah.
they'll stay out all
Mm.
day trying to find that 17 and a half inch fish. It's just complete madness. But yeah,
Well, we've talked about, you mentioned the North Carolina boats. You know, I fished with Captain Tyler Carasimo of Simple Life Charters in July. One of my clients invited me on the trip. He books them a number of times a year. Great guy. And those of you that know the Carasimo family history, that's a legendary name in the Montauk world. The dad, Jamie, runs the Miss Montauk. Tyler runs the Simple Life. And they're very connected with the commercial fishermen in Montauk. And they've seen, like Tyler and I had a frank discussion about this. He's seen what I've seen, which is a slow drop year after year after year after year. And, I mentioned the commercial fishing, right? Because we all know Fluke go to the continental shelf in the winter. That's where they spawn. And they're getting decimated by draggers. And Tyler cut me off and said, "You're right, but it's not the local draggers. They're subject to very strict regulations here. They have X amount of pounds a day. It's the guys from the South that are coming up that apparently," and I can't even find where you get this information. How are they not subject to some type of regulation on this? I get they're not fishing New York waters technically, because they might be 100 miles out. But like, how does somebody say, hey, there's definitely a decline. This is probably one of the main reasons. And how do we regulate it better? And I'm not asking that. That's a rhetorical question. I don't think that's something we can answer. Yeah, and just
let's hit some of these questions.
Oh, I'm trying to pop them up from time to time.
Yeah, we got a bunch of good comments in here and questions. I want to make sure we get
here's one from James Flynn. Roger, what's your feeling on the Fluke migration with the offshore wind projects? I'm glad, James, you asked Roger and you didn't say to the group.
Yeah, I really have no opinion. I mean, as far as I know, the existing wind farms off of Block Island seems to be providing pretty good fishing. I other than that, I really have no data.
I don't think it impacts it at all personally.
Yeah, I would be surprised if it does, especially something like Fluke.
I know we fluke fish off the windmills and Block a lot, although it hasn't really been that great this year. My trips, at least, I've only gone twice with Rick on his boat, and it was early in the season, but we didn't even catch a short. But historically, it's been good, if that means anything. Yeah,
as long as they provide access. There were some posts I was reading where, like you couldn't go near them or this and that. But if they're allowing you to fish next to them, I don't see, at least for us recreational guys. I know the draggers don't like it, which is almost a reason for us to support it. But,
Glenn is asking a good question. Was fishing last weekend in the bay in New Jersey and saw a boat keeping undersized fluke. How would you confront them? Or do you just bite your tongue? That's a really good question.
Well, no, I mean, there's option C. You just call the DEC.
That's the only option in my book.
Yeah, that's the only option. Don't confront anyone. Just,
you don't know. It's nutcase people.
There's no reason for that.
Yeah.
And Troy agrees. Report them.
Yeah, just report them.
Yeah. So a lot of here's a good one about the sand eel migration. So Robert, about my comment about the Long Island Sound fishing being good this year, and Roger, to your point, it's true. There are years it's phenomenal, and there's years that it's like completely dead. That you might have one day.
Yeah, and sand eels does seem to be the biggest part of that story in the Sound. And by the way, I personally think the 6-inch jerk shad imitates a sand eel, and that is a favorite food of Fluke. And even if they don't see it for months or years, when they see that kind of profile, they just kind of go crazy.
Yeah. So, and as long as we're talking about the Long Island Sound and sand eels, that's one of the very few times this year where we've seen Fluke regurgitating sand eels as we've caught them. And somebody else made the comment that they're all over, like you can't miss them. They're on top of the water. They're everywhere. Your depth finder is lit up with them. I've filleted easily over, I don't know how many fluke this year, 100 plus easily. This is going to sound shocking, but on my non-Long Island Sound trips, not one fluke that I filleted has had anything in its belly, which is
Nothing.
a
Empty.
complete first for me.
Wow.
The last two trips where we caught a lot of keepers, every single one of them had empty bellies. We cut the bellies open of every fish.
Wow.
I checked
They were all
everything.
empty.
I'm always curious, and I'm just shocked that we can't find one that has anything in its stomach. And is
They're
that
moving.
the lethargy? Is that they're and JT, you and I talked about this, and Roger, I'm curious if you've seen this. I don't know how it works off the beach, but typically when we're fluke fishing, you have a window where when you find the fishing will be good for an hour, 2 hours. It's a decent amount of time where you can, and then it'll shut off for an hour and a half. Then it'll be on again for an hour and a half. And it's a cycle. This year, that window is 15 minutes, 20 minutes. That's it.
I mean, it could be a window. It could just be there's fewer fish, right? So before your 1 hour window, you're basically cycling through a larger, you know, if those fish are stacked denser on the bottom. I mean, when you put your jig down in front of 10 fish, you know, only a certain percentage of them are going to come and eat it. And the more fish you put your jig in front of, the higher that percentage is going to be. So if you're only dealing with, say, half the number of fish as you normally are, then your window might be, you know, half as long. But I've noticed the same thing this year from shore. And I don't keep many fish. I release most of my keepers, but the few that I did keep this year, they were eating crabs into late July. I think that was the last time I kept anything. And usually by then you get a mix of crab and bait fish. But, you know, it's hard to say. The other thing is I think crabs stay in their stomach longer as well. You know,
They digest a little slower.
Right. So
I'm
I
listening
don't
to a school of smallmouth blow up on bait behind me right now. I can see them
oh,
out my
man.
window.
Yeah, sounds like the perfect vacation.
JT, that's actually a very good segue because we had a couple of comments, and this is where I'm going to stay really quiet because this is not my forte, but we'll show this one from Troy. I caught a fluke on a Senko one time, and then not to be outdone, LI Fish Kings wrote LOL. So for you guys, that's an acronym for laughing out loud. I've caught a fluke on a SP minnow. So these, you know, I'm not a freshwater guy, but these sound like freshwater techniques to me, both of them. And I know you both have strong opinions on, and we maybe chatted about it a little earlier, on a correlation between freshwater fishing and fluke fishing.
Big time. It's especially smallmouth. Fluke relate to the bottom and structure and current and bait, just like a smallmouth does. They're so similar. You know, it's really amazing. I know, Roger, you've been experimenting with your crankbait techniques from shore, and actually, ironically enough, last year I started something very similar, but using bigger like crankbaits, like 6XDs.
Okay.
You know, big bomber fat-free shads on a 3-way, and I only released one video about it yet, but basically the same type of strategy. It's giving them something different to look at. I've been experimenting with, you know, silent crankbaits with rattles, and it's been pretty effective.
So when you say a 3-way, you mean you're putting it on the bottom with a sinker?
Yes.
And then a leader that's running. Right. Okay.
4 foot long leader, about a 10-inch drop down to a 8, 10 ounce weight.
Oh yeah.
And especially once the current starts really picking up, when it's, you know, around the 1.6 to 2.1 mile an hour drift speed, that crankbait is just banging on the bottom.
Oh yeah.
You know, and I'll hold it in my hand, release some line, let the crankbait float back up and pause, and usually, just like a bass, that's when they eat it. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I've been trying some of those super deep crankbaits, like, like the Big M 7.5, those things that pull your arm off. Not great from the kayak because they actually pull your kayak.
Sure.
So, but I'm sure from a boat, and plus it's just very inefficient, once you're over 20 feet. Even if it dives to 30, you need to bomb a cast so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I can definitely see that working. And you can probably experiment with some of those Magnum square bills too. If you
It's
keep
absolutely
that leader a little shorter, right?
exactly. Yeah. It's and I even just different size crankbaits as far as bill shape, body shape. The last trip out, I tried a Lure Jensen. What is that called? Got the name of that crankbait. It's got a crazy looking lip on it. It's I can't remember the name of it. Hot Lips, actually. It's called a Hot Lips.
Okay, wow, that's
Lure
really
Jensen
old
Hot Lips.
school.
Yeah, Hot Lips Express. I probably got about 50 of them, and so I hooked one on, and man, I'll tell you, it's actually a
where
smaller
you
body
need to do
crankbait.
in front of the radar tower in September. And I heard the bite is already picking up there on the south side of Montauk because that current cranks.
Yeah.
You're moving often 2 to 3 miles an hour. That would be interesting there.
Yeah. Just it's something different. It's something different they haven't seen, and it's using their aggressiveness, against them. So
yeah, and Daya just wrote, my buddy outfished me every time that I went out with him this year with live baits. He exclusively uses killies and laughs at me for using gulp.
Yeah. Well, what was his average size fish? I mean, to me, killies are a small fish bait. I'm sure once in a blue moon, someone will pull a 25-inch fish from killies, but for the most part, if they're keepers, they're barely keepers.
Yeah. I would just go back to what I said earlier with the deep water, with the jerk shads, that it seems like we couldn't get past the interference fish, at least where I fish, where JT fishes. I would presume you would have a very difficult time keeping a sea robin or a sea bass away from the live killie.
Yeah, I could see using like a full size mackerel, something like that. To get a really big bite. Especially this year, there's been tons and tons of chub mackerel around, and the fluke are eating them. So.
Oh yeah.
And Daya did respond with, that's what I thought too, but he caught big keeps, 24 inches being his biggest personal best.
Yeah. All right.
Look, we all fish, Daya. I don't think I know you, but we've all fished with baits right before gulp. So I don't think any of us here are going to say gulp is the only way. It just, in our experience, I don't want to speak for Roger and JT, so I'll say in my experience as somebody who used bait the first 17, 18 years of his fluke fishing life, I caught a lot of big fish and I caught a lot of fish. But once I switched to gulp, that catch rate went up exponentially. So not saying the other, bait won't work, but
no, and more than just bait, killies specifically to me is a early season backwater type of bait. Right, like May, maybe into June, and you're fishing like small rivers and creeks and back bait, marina docks, that kind of stuff. That's where the killies are. And when the water temperature is still like lower 50s, that could outfish gulp. Like you really need to adjust your jigging when the water is that cold first week of the opener, whereas the killie is going to do the work for you. But to me, the average size fish that you catch on killies is just nothing to write home about. If it's a different thing if you're doing like a 12-inch dogfish strip, on a big jig, and that's going to catch a big fish, right? But a live killie is,
might catch
bait.
a big dogfish by our area.
Exactly.
This is the long strips down. That's what we get a lot. Okay, Fluking Barnacles asked another good question. This is the first year I've been going out for fluke very early. The bite is very good in the AM, but once it hits around 11 a.m., the bite dies drastically. Not really a question, more of a statement. I'm not seeing this personally, but JT, why don't we start with you, then we'll go to Roger. Are you seeing that trend?
No, I'm actually, and you know this, I've actually been going out later and later. I'm focusing on the tide.
Yeah, me
For
too.
me, everything is tide related. It's nice because I don't have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go out. I'm just waiting to hit the tide at the right time, making sure that my drifts are going over the spot over and over again as many times as possible during that peak. And it's about a 40-minute long window. And I'm making sure that I'm making extremely short drifts. I don't have the luxury of a trolling motor, so I have to keep moving the boat back and forth. But we were down the last trip doing 15-foot long drifts. I mean, they were that. There was a whole school of fish on one particular piece of the bottom, and then it dies, and we struggle just like everybody else does. There's that slow time where you're just your arms ready to fall off because you've been jigging so much. We'll go have a sandwich and wait until I'll be looking at the fish trap buoys or the lobster buoys and just waiting for that current to turn, or looking at the GPS and I start to see my drift angle just starts to change. Then I know I have to go position the boat on the spot I want to fish for the incoming or outgoing, whatever it is. But it's usually the top of the tide and the bottom of the tide. That slow 0.7, 0.8, 0.9 mile an hour drift speed is where we've been catching everything. And it's been lights out when you hit the right spot.
Roger, do you have a thought on this?
I've heard that from more people this year that there's an early morning bite. I mean, these are all guys who fish from shore. I think time of day as well as tide to a certain extent is very location specific. So there's some spots that regardless of the tide, once that sun comes up, the bite's done. And one spot that we fished that's sort of like that, there's a deep rock pile that extends all the way into the beach. And I think what happens is the fluke move up at first light. They kind of feed in the shallow water. And then once that light is up, they follow the rock pile all the way back down. If the water is clear, I think the larger fluke are going to be pretty wary, staying very shallow. Because to me, they're, once the fluke gets to a certain size, and it's the same deal with a freshwater bass, their main predator is going to be a bird of prey. So to me, if you have very calm conditions and the water is very clear, they're probably not going to be around. If it's cloudy and there's chop or wave action, then you might squeeze a little bit more time out of that bite.
Yeah. So what a good
I want
follow-up
to add,
for
Halkias, can I add something real quick to that? And it's got me thinking about some things. So it's kind of almost like in a sense we're having the whole conversation about fluke, but it's almost kind of like having two different types of fish. You have these shallow fish, that guys are catching from the beach, and then these deeper fish that are in that 75, 85, 100-foot range. And that I could see where there could be an early morning bite. It's just like you said, Roger, shallow largemouth. There is an early morning bite, and I think it all has to do with light penetration.
Yep.
Those shallow fish
that's all I was going to say is maybe fluking barnacles can jump back on and just comment whether he's fishing shallow or not.
Guarantee he's fishing from the beach or shallow.
Yeah. I mean, you do need light penetration for that really to matter, in my opinion. I mean, in the past, I used to think that the brighter the better, like 1, 2 o'clock on a clear bluebird day. I mean, that's still the case for most of the spots that I fish. But if like your water clarity, there's all these factors. At the end of the day, I don't think it's as predictable as people think it is. Like sometimes you just hit upon a pattern that might last for like a week, and then after that it just goes away. So
I almost wonder if anybody's tried at night.
Sorry, JT, go ahead.
I'd be curious to know if anybody's been fishing from shore at night for fluke. It almost sounds to me like that early morning bite is the end of what may be a night bite.
So funny you say that, because Fluking Barnacles has come back with another question or another comment. Chat ChatGPT says fluke hunt at night. Is this true? I don't know because I never went fluke fishing after the sun
No,
goes
there's
down.
there's fluke that are caught at night. I mean,
Mhm.
every year I know striper guys surf fishing late in the season will catch pretty big fish on
Big
like
ones.
purple SP minnows and that kind of stuff. And I know people fish around docks that have lights at night. That makes sense to me as well. My personal experience is once that sun dips beyond the horizon, that bite kind of just shuts down.
Mhm.
And
I can tell you from personal experience, the biggest fluke I've personally seen caught was back in 2004, 2005 on the Viking on a nighttime trip in September, the year that they had the limit at 21 inches in New York and they shut the season down August 31. A 16-pound fluke was caught in September on a nighttime striper trip on the Viking that I was on, and it had to be
Good Lord.
released. But it was on a live eel at night, and a good friend of mine who I grew up with, Tony Hong Fishing, he really doesn't publish videos anymore. But he used to post videos where he was fishing piers at night, and he just needed a little bit of light, and he'd catch fluke.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of light, right? I mean, they can silhouette that bait from below. Speaking of back then when it was 21 and a half inches, I remember those as being very good years. I was fishing mostly Western Sound from rental skiffs, like out of City Island, and I've caught a lot of big fluke during those years.
Again, I'm going to get in trouble with the fluke crazies here, but I agree with you, Roger. When those regulations went into effect, the years after that were really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think
to be said about that, but
I think part of it. Well, part of it, I think, is it put a lot of people off the effort to go and find fluke, right? Like I remember Raritan Bay, like all the New York boats just stopped fishing basically because they could, especially the first year. But I do think, in terms of internet theories, right, one that goes around a lot is 18 inches or 19 inches. They're all female, so you're killing all the breeders. That's one way to look at it. The other way is when you take a smaller female, you're denying her X number of spawns. So say you move it up to 21 inches, that female fish is going to have 3 or 4 spawn cycles versus if you take them at 18 inches, right? And of course, you need to balance out the release mortality. If there's not enough 21-inch fish, then the effort goes up. Everyone catch and releases 19, 20-inch fish all day. So I don't envy the regulators, at least not the scientists. The economic part of the regulation team, I have less sympathy for. But yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, the I don't envy the regulators either, but at least in New York, a lot of the science behind it is so flawed and illogical. For example, they have a quota for recreational anglers. If you don't reach it, which I suspect we may not this year, at least in years past, it resulted in an increase in the what we could catch the following year, with the thinking being, well, we allocated 200,000 pounds for them. They only hit 120,000. We're going to up it 80,000 next year. Instead of thinking, more boats fishing than ever. Maybe something's not right. Maybe there's less stock, and maybe that's why they're not catching their quota.
Yeah.
It just seems illogical to me.
Well, I mean, I'll just say this without getting into the specific arguments, whatever problems there are in our scientific picture of the fluke population, the only solution is better science. It's not going to be listening to charter party boat captains sort of getting a feel for the population. Like, that's what they did with striped bass, and they're saying, oh, there's a huge population 500 miles offshore swimming to Africa. No, I mean, these things have to be based on evidence and data.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, if the science is flawed or if it is bad, the only way you will know it is through other sources of science. Um, and that's sort of what I'm waiting on. This year's benchmark survey, they published the methodology. Anyone can go and read it, and hopefully it answers some questions.
And Roger, speaking of science, we're going to toss this one to you since you seem like the smartest one out of the three of us. Can you explain barometric pressure impact on fish feeding versus current water movement?
I never pay attention to that. For Fluke, the only species of fish that I sort of will keep that in the back of my mind is largemouth.
Mhm.
I don't even think smallmouth care that much about pressure.
Usually with pressure, it's trends, right? So if you get 3 days of a decreasing pressure or rising pressure, it's going to affect the fish. That's when we talk about, like, on a bright blue, sky blue day, it's no clouds, that's a high pressure. Usually those days are not going to be your most productive fishing days. That's why a lot of times when you go out and you're, especially in freshwater, you're fishing, on an incoming rainstorm, some of the best days of fishing that I've ever had were was when it snowed. In bass tournaments, we were at Kentucky Lake and it started snowing and the fishing was phenomenal. So that incoming low pressure is usually what triggers the fish. So it's always about trends. I don't think it might affect fluke, the shallow fluke, but it's not going to affect the deeper ones.
I would be very surprised if there's any measurable difference with fluke. I mean, with fluke, personally, I just fish the conditions that's in front of me. I am mostly fishing from shore. Your decisions are very limited. Like, you get to a beach and you're like, do I walk north or south? Right. And then that's pretty much it. Now, you guys who captain boats, that's a completely, your entire existence revolves around your decision making. Like, how long do I stay at this ledge? And, because you can run 100 miles if you wanted the next moment. So for me, it's just, and kayak, slightly more choices to make, but very limited range. Like you're only going to pedal something like 10, maybe 12 miles a day. So yeah, barometric pressure for fluke is not even on the radar. It shouldn't be on anyone's radar, just my opinion.
Yeah, I'll just chime in on that one. I kind of have seen them shut down before a hurricane hits. It's an observation I've made. Some of the worst fishing is right before a storm hits. My personal experience only. That would normally be the pressure dropping, right? You guys keep me honest here.
Yeah, so before the storm, can be pretty good fishing. Actually, I just remembered this. One of the craziest fishing days I've ever had was when I was togging from a kayak and a storm was approaching that I didn't know about, and I almost died in that storm. But before that, I think I had 26 keeper tog within an hour and 20 minutes.
Wow.
It was literally as soon as you can drop your crab down.
Nature knows too. Nature knows when stuff's going on.
So my first year chartering, Roger, on a really crappy day that we weren't even planning on going out, but my client had me booked 2 days in a row and he was staying in a hotel.
Nice.
We decided to go out because there was going to be a huge storm coming through. And we only fished for like 3 hours and we caught something like 35 keepers and we were the only boat out. And we got in just before that massive rain windstorm hit. So could be something to that.
Tog, if that question was about tog, then just based on my personal anecdotal experience, then definitely.
Yeah. So Glenn asked a question here too, and I thought I would take this one for a second. My bay was loaded with peanut bunker, cast net a bunch, and brought them to the reef. 2 keeper, 22. Ever try live peanuts? My personal experience, I'll hand it over to the group in a second, but the answer is yes. When we first started fishing with Skinner back in 2017, I think it was the first video he ever did on Rick's boat. Rick's son had cast net and they kept it in a trap, a whole bunch of snappers. Back then, the limit was like 15 a person or 10 a person, and peanut bunkers. And we went out to Montauk, and I used the live bait, and all I could catch were large sea bass. Skinner and the rest of the guys were using their regular gulp setup, and again, they were catching everything. So how do I get everybody back? Oh boy,
There we go.
That's
there
good.
we go.
That's
Yeah.
good.
We like this one more? No, we like this one more.
The other one's good. There we go.
Playing around with the see, this is dangerous again, having me in charge of the technology here.
Yeah, I'm surprised we got on.
Yeah, no, and yeah.
You're doing
So
great.
more questions. I know there's a lot of questions.
Let's try to hit them all, John. Even if they're just comments, let's get. I want everybody's name on there.
Well, I'll just say one thing about the live bait. I'm almost afraid to use live bait now because I don't want to catch my PB on the live peanut. That actually happened to a friend of mine. Well, not a friend, just someone who messaged me, and I congratulated him. But then I thought to myself, that's the reason why I don't do it, because I just don't want that to happen, you know. But definitely, you know, aside from killies, peanuts, snappers, you know, although I don't know about using game fish to catch fluke, but the limit's 3 a day. So they're a traditional big fluke bait. You know, if you're willing to drag them around, most likely you'll get a robin or a short fluke. They'll go after it too. But you put a 9-10 inch snapper on a 3-way rig, it's you know, if there's a big fluke in the area.
It's what
Jake,
the world
go
record
after
was
it.
caught on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say JT has a great video about Charlie Nappy and the world record and where it was caught. Right, the Ranger Rack. We're not sharing any secrets, and then it was caught on a live snapper. Is there good fluke coming out of Atlantic Highlands offshore? I have no idea. I think that's Jersey, right, Roger? Keep me honest.
Yeah. I mean, look, anywhere you have access and there's salt water, there's going to be fluke around right now. You know, that's the beauty about fluke fishing is it's just so accessible, and they're always sort of willing to bite if you can find them. That's why I say they remind me of smallmouth rather than largemouth. The largemouth can get kind of moody, you know, conditions go bad. Smallmouth, as long as you can locate them, they're usually game. And I think fluke is the same way.
100%.
Yeah.
So Roger, we have a mutual client / friend, Frank.
Yes. Hello, Frank.
I have a very funny Frank story. JT, he likes you too, even though you don't know him from a hole in the ground. He's the nicest guy. So Frank was out with me one day last Wednesday, and we had a tough day. Could not get a bite. Now, coincidentally, Skinner, Rick, Doc, Cliff, there was a whole bunch of them. They went to block on Rick's boat. They had 2 fish. So we stayed closer. We felt like we made the right. And Frank kept saying to me, "You're going to limit tomorrow. You're going to limit tomorrow. Watch." I'm like, "There's no chance, Frank." Sure enough, I have a Skinner package the next day. 3 guys drove 1,000 miles round trip to fish with us. And we limited and we crushed them in big fish. And I mean, it was amazing.
Man.
So Frank is texting me, "How are you guys doing? How are you?" And I'm telling him, "Oh, we have 9. It's like 10 o'clock. Long story short, I get Skinner to record a video, and we sent it to him by text where he says, "See, Frank, if you had only hired me again for a Skinner package," because Frank's done a couple Skinner packages, "you would have limited too." So that's the funny story there. I don't know how it's funny to me, maybe not to the rest. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, good point here from Overdraft. I feel once the barometric pressure has plummeted, it all shuts down, but the pressure build before a storm feels like it causes a frenzy.
100%.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, this is an easy one. What's been more productive this season, back bays or ocean? I don't think anyone will argue with back bays. Boys, agree?
Yeah.
I agree. 100%.
Even from shore, that's been the case.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
like the out front, which is my favorite, you know, like out front beaches, wide open spaces, you can spread out. It's just been absolute garbage so far anyway.
Yeah, so James is saying live spot. You guys ever try that? I haven't.
No. But I found live spot in fluke stomachs before. That's usually one of the first things they chuck up when you pull them onto the sand. You know, there's like 3 kinds of bait fish. Like the spot comes out first. I don't know why.
Yeah. So when there's an upwelling from a hard south blow, how would you modify your approach? I'll offer my opinion. If you can get shallow, I think you're less likely to be affected. It's not always possible where I fish. Roger, JT, you have an opinion?
You find protected water if you can. If you're fishing from shore, and I get this comment a lot. People say, "Well, in your videos, it's always so calm," and well, that's usually the better fishing days. When that south wind starts cranking in the summer along the Jersey shore, one, the temperature drops, and you can still fish it, but and there's ways you have to compensate. Like you can't cast as far. You need to line watch versus trying to feel your jig, because you're only fishing 1/4 ounce. And most of the fish along the surf, they're going to be at the edge, that first lip anyway. So instead of trying to bomb a cast all the way out, you would just cover more distance on foot, and you would make shorter pitches right beyond the lip. And that's kind of how you have to fish. So
yeah, and so a compliment / a request from XX Angler. Have to say this video is both fun and informative. Thank you. I would love to see more live chats focused on the Western Long Island Sound. We can have guests like Roger who have a focus on that area. Unfortunately, it's not an area I really have ever fished in my life, maybe once or twice years ago. JT, I presume you're not radically exposed to the Western Sound either, right?
No, not specifically. It's just too far. But we have covered in some of the map reading videos that I've done for subscribers. We've covered a bunch of fluke spots.
Yeah, and I'm going to be fishing with Joey Leggio from Fishing Long Island in a couple of weeks. So we'll try to get him as a guest because I know he's a lot further west than we are, and he's been a charter guide forever. Has a very successful YouTube channel too. Seems like a really knowledgeable guy. We'll try to get him on, and maybe.
Definitely.
And I know Nino, my good friend Nino Averso, he's wants to come on also.
We'll get Skinner on here too.
Yeah, we'll get Skinner on, but that won't change the geographical reach of these.
No, not the geographical reach. But.
Yeah.
I'll just say one thing about the extreme Western Sound, that City Island, Glen Island area. It always struck me how much hard structure there is out there. Coming from Raritan Bay, where it's basically just a channel fishery. Like you're either in the middle of the channel or the edge, or you're fishing the flats off of it. But you get out to the Western Sound, it's like there's rock ledges and drop-offs and hard structure everywhere, humps. It's almost hard to know where to begin, So that's my only.
Yeah, the Whitestone Bridge area used to be a pretty well-known fluke area, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. Like back in, I think, 06, 07, like those few years when New York was 21.5, Hart's Island, Whitestone, Throgs Neck, Stepping Stones, like, yeah, that stuff produced some very big fish. Yeah. Usually like August into that full moon in late August, it was incredible fishing. And I didn't have electronics back then. I just triangulated from a little skiff. But yeah.
That's cool.
JT, is the 6 Mile Reef considered Western Sound? I don't think it is, right?
No, that's central. I would consider that central.
I would almost consider that Eastern, no?
It depends what part of it you fish. I mean, I call it central. At least for me, it would be central. Yeah,
and T Cone 17 again. A lot of short fluke this year. Yep, agree. Definitely agree. Personal recommendations for spinning reels, mainly for fluking and blackfish jigging.
That's probably two different reels that you're looking at. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I wouldn't go anything smaller than a 4,000 size.
Oh,
If
we
you're
have
looking for
much
both.
different. I have much different opinions than both of you on this. I'm Mr. Budget here, especially now that my entire gainful employment is through YouTube and fishing charters. I'm perfectly happy with a small Evic, the Tsunami Evic 2000 or 3000 reel. I use that almost exclusively for fluking. When I use a spinner and for my light tackle black fishing. I think as long as you have the drag tight and sufficient line, when I'm togging, I put really light line on. That gets me in a lot of trouble with some of the viewers who think I'm crazy, but I use 10-pound braid and I keep the drag loose. If I'm trophy hunting with that light outfit, I put 30-pound braid and I tighten the drag. I've never had any issues with those.
Well, you tie a very long leader when you're togging anyway, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's like the brace size I don't think matters all that much. But if that viewer is asking about like shallow freshwater type fluking that I do, those are two different reels. You want like a 2500, 3000 size Shimano or Daiwa for fluke, and then like JT said, 4 or 5000 size spinning reel for tog. Just
I have shivers listening to this.
I know Nino uses 4,000 size
for togging, but I get it. Yeah, that's what makes fishing great. We can all have.
Well, when I first started togging, I did use very light. Like I think if you go back 7-8 years, you'll see videos of me using like a 6-8 medium light Zodius, which is like almost like a crappy rod. And I caught some really nice tog on it until I broke off a couple that I couldn't, like, not even stop, but even slow down. And after that, togging just became sort of a heavy duty type of fishing for me. I mean, it gave me nightmares, those fish.
And our friend Frank is reminding us again about also Kidco Cheese. He's a Western Sound guy, and I have a connection with him also. Yeah, definitely try to get him. So James, Port Jeff, I get my limit every time. Last time I got 2 7-pounders. I presume you're talking fluke here, right, James? Yeah.
I mean,
Peter. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Raj.
No, I'm saying if James could follow up, I mean, is that still going on? Because I know there was a good bite in like the Mid Sound area earlier.
I'm hearing no from my sources, Skinner. But
on that particular stretch, but there are other parts of the Sound right now, Mid Sound, that are producing
deeper though.
Deeper, yes.
Yeah, and Pete makes a good point. Wherever there's short fluke, there's always big fluke. I don't know about always, but at least the areas that you and I fish, JT, it's always a positive, even if we catch 3, 4, 5 short fluke in a row, because I agree with Pete that I'm confident that lurking with them are going to be bigger fish.
Sure, and I think Pete too also, because my home port is in Niantic. Niantic Bay is kind of special in that regard because that's always been a big mix, especially in the Two Tree Channel over near the nuke plant. There's, there could be a 10-pounder. You'll catch a ton of shorts and then catch a 10-pounder. That's kind of a special place that happens. Usually, most of the time, if I'm catching a bunch of shorts, I'll just say it, Musquamic, it's been all shorts since beginning of July. And it's just short after short. And I just don't think there's any big fish there.
And JT, I'm going to give T-Cone17 your phone number because every question is for you. JT, have you fished east of Middle Grounds? Good fluke bite there at Drawl. JT, how is Middle Ground area for fluke? So you want to tackle those quick because we're running out of time. I'm trying to go quick here.
It's been very spotty. I have a couple of my buddies that fish those areas. It's been very spotty. It's been hit or miss.
Yeah, and then just Chris agreeing with me, your 10-pound doesn't break. My issue, Chris, is I'm afraid to over tighten 10-pound. I know it's not going to break, but if I let too much drag out, the braid, even with a longer, let's say even a 6-foot leader, the braid could touch a rock and break that way. I'm not worried about it breaking from the pressure of the fish. I'm more worried about a big fish screaming drag and bringing the braid into the rocks. All right, this might be. We'll take one last question from Robert. Is anybody concerned about the sewage runoff into the Long Island Sound that came because of the severe rainstorms? I can tell you, Robert, I fished yesterday, and the Sound, Gardner's Bay, Block Island Sound, even the ocean, really dirty, and the fishing was way off yesterday from the last time we had gone out. So I'm always concerned when there's a huge rainstorm, and I saw a lot of debris in the water. And I don't know, JT, you might remember last year. Those of you who are watching, maybe you remember last year if you fished Eastern Long Island or Rhode Island, because we saw it there too. There was so many tree branches and logs and just debris in the water from rain in Vermont, out of all places, that came down all the rivers that come through Connecticut into the Long Island Sound.
I live right on the Connecticut River, like right on it. So, and I see, as soon as I see the water levels start coming up and all the debris going by, you just know that it's like a couple weeks ago, it was chocolate milk. It looked like Yoo-hoo. And that all pours right out. It usually goes through the race. Some of it will spill off into the gut, but usually that really puts a damper on things.
All right.
And the sewage, that happens. It's, it'll flush out, but usually I'm more concerned about the watercolor and the debris.
Well, I would have thought you would have a stronger opinion on the sewage, given your Willie Nelson attire today. I would think conservation is more your forte.
Hey man, we're up here in the mountains in the wilderness, and
I'm surprised we didn't.
I've been eating lobster for 4 days. I got lobster sweats. I got lobster sweats.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, listen, guys. Number one, thank you, Roger. It was great having you on.
You.
What a
Likewise.
fresh perspective on fluke fishing. Great chat with everybody.
That's great.
And Roger, one more time, give everybody a plug for those that normally watch this through our channels. Cooking and Fishing is the YouTube site, cookingandfishing.com. Anything else you want to promote?
No, that's it. Like the website I just started this year has just a couple of things on it, but seems to be doing okay for people. So if anyone wants those little spinner blades, they can check it out. I'm trying to keep up with production. But in any case, we're sort of nearing the end of the season here, and hopefully things turn around with this moon, right?
Yeah.
I would be surprised if we finish as strongly as we did last year, but who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, just based on what we've seen so far.
Yeah, so that'll segue into my pitch and JT's pitch. I have 3 straight trips happening starting tomorrow. JT, you'll probably be out there too. We have our Patreon for JT, YouTube members for my channel. We have our show Sunday where we're going to recap the last few days of fishing. So consider becoming a member of our channels. If you're not, thank you all for joining. Great discussion. Thank you again, Roger.
Thank you, Roger. It was great.
With you guys on Sunday. Everyone else will see you in 2 weeks. Take care, all.
Take care, everybody. Thank you for watching.